The morning sun peeked through the curtains as Sophia Andrews stared at her reflection in the bathroom mirror. The 16-year-old girl sighed, tucking a strand of brown hair behind her ear. Today was another family dinner, and she already felt the knot forming in her stomach. "Sophia, hurry up, we're leaving in 15 minutes. Her mother Caroline called from downstairs. "Coming, Mom," Sophia replied, quickly grabbing her sketchbook and tucking it into her backpack. She never went anywhere without it. The Andrews family lived in a nice two-story house in a quiet neighborhood. From the outside, they looked perfect. Father Richard was a successful businessman, Mother Caroline worked part-time at a local bank, and their son Michael was the star quarterback of his high school team. Then there was Sophia, who preferred quiet corners with her art supplies to the loud social gatherings her brother enjoyed. As Sophia came downstairs, her father looked up from his phone and frowned. "Is that what you're wearing?" Richard asked, eyeing her simple blue dress and cardigan. "Couldn't you put on something nicer for once? Your cousin Emily always looks so put together." Sophia felt her cheeks burn. "This is new, Dad." Caroline quickly stepped in. "She looks lovely, Richard. We're going to be late if we don't leave now." The drive to Grandpa Thomas's house was quiet. Sophia stared out the window, watching houses and trees blur together. Her brother Michael sat next to her, playing a game on his phone, completely unaware of her discomfort. Grandpa Thomas lived in an old farmhouse at the edge of town. He had been a judge before retiring, and at 72, he was still sharp as a tack. His wife, Sophia's grandmother, had passed away 3 years ago, but he maintained Sunday family dinners as a tradition. "There's my favorite granddaughter." Thomas beamed as Sophia walked through the door. His smile always made her feel better. "Hi, Grandpa," she said, hugging him tightly. The family gathered around the large oak table that had been in the Williams family for generations. Aunt Linda and Uncle Bob were already there with their daughter Emily, who immediately started talking about her recent cheerleading competition. "First place, of course," Emily said proudly. "Dad's getting me a new car as a reward." Richard nodded approvingly. "That's what happens when you apply yourself to worthwhile activities." Sophia felt his eyes on her, and she shrank in her seat. Everyone knew what worthwhile activities meant to her father, and art wasn't one of them. As they ate, conversation flowed around Sophia. She stayed quiet, pushing food around her plate. Then her grandfather asked the question that changed everything. "Sophia, how's your art coming along? Have you decided if you're applying to that summer program we talked about?" The table went quiet. Sophia looked up, surprised. I've been working on my portfolio. The deadline is next week." Richard put down his fork with a sharp clink. "Our program? This is the first I'm hearing about this." "It's at the State University," Thomas explained. "One of the best in the country for young artists." "And who's going to pay for this?" Richard asked, his voice cold. "Art is a hobby, not a career path." Sophia's eyes dropped to her plate. "It has a scholarship option." "Even with a scholarship, it's a waste of time," Richard said firmly. "You should be focusing on real subjects. Something that will actually get you into a good college." Grandpa Thomas watched carefully, his eyes moving between his granddaughter and his son-in-law. Something in his expression changed, a decision forming behind his eyes. "Richard," he said calmly, "perhaps we could discuss Sophia's talents with an open mind." "There's nothing to discuss," Richard replied. "I know what's best for my daughter." As everyone returned to their meals in awkward silence, no one noticed the determined look on Grandpa Thomas's face. No one except Sophia, who caught his reassuring wink across the table. Something was about to change. She could feel it. Monday morning arrived with dark clouds hanging over the city. Sophia walked slowly to school, her mind still replaying yesterday's dinner at Grandpa Thomas's house. The way her father had dismissed her art dreams in front of everyone made her chest hurt. "Hey, Sophia," called a friendly voice. Sophia looked up to see her best friend Lily running toward her, colorful bracelets jingling on her wrist. "Hi," Sophia replied, trying to smile. Lily immediately noticed something was wrong. "Bad weekend?" "Just the usual. Dad being Dad." The two girls walked into Westridge High School together. Sophia had known Lily since 3rd grade, and she was the only person who truly understood what Sophia dealt with at home. "Did you finish your portfolio for the summer program?" Lily asked as they reached their lockers. "Almost," Sophia said. "I still need to add my newest piece, but..." Her voice trailed off. But what? That painting of the old lighthouse is amazing. Sophia bit her lip. Dad doesn't know I'm still applying. He made it clear at dinner yesterday that he thinks it's a waste of time. So what? It's your life, not his, Lily said firmly. And besides, your grandpa is on your side, right? Before Sophia could answer, the bell rang. They hurried to their first class, art with Ms. Jenkins, Sophia's favorite teacher and biggest supporter. Today we're starting portrait studies, Ms. Jenkins announced. And I have exciting news. A representative from the State University Summer Arts Program will be visiting our school this Friday to review potential applicants. Sophia's heart raced. This was her chance to get her work seen directly, but it also meant she needed to tell her parents, or at least her mom. After school, Sophia walked home slowly, rehearsing what she would say to her mother. Caroline Andrews was always easier to talk to than Richard, but she rarely stood up to her husband. When Sophia arrived home, she found her mother in the kitchen preparing dinner. "Mom, can I talk to you about something important?" Sophia asked, setting her backpack down. Caroline wiped her hands on a towel. "Of course, honey. What is it?" "The representative from the summer art program is coming to school on Friday. I want to show them my portfolio." Her mother's smile faded slightly. "Oh, Sophia, you know how your father feels about this. But it's important to me, Mom. Really important." Sophia pulled out her sketchbook and showed her mother her latest drawings. Caroline looked at the pages with genuine admiration. "These are beautiful, sweetheart. You're so talented." "Then why won't Dad support me? Why does he always make me feel like I'm doing something wrong?" Sophia's voice cracked. Caroline sighed and sat next to her daughter. "Your father wants security for you. He worries about your future." "But what about what I want?" Tears started forming in Sophia's eyes. Just then, the front door opened. Richard Andrews walked in, dressed in his business suit, looking tired from work. "What's going on here?" he asked, seeing Sophia's tears and the open sketchbook. Caroline straightened up. "Sophia was just showing me her art. She has a chance to meet with the summer program representative on Friday." Richard's face hardened. "I thought we settled this already. Art is not a reliable path, Sophia." "But Dad, I'm really good at it. Miss Jenkins thinks I could get the scholarship." "Miss Jenkins isn't responsible for paying your college tuition," Richard snapped. "I won't support this fantasy career." End of discussion. Sophia grabbed her sketchbook and ran upstairs to her room, slamming the door. Through her tears, she reached for her phone and called the one person she knew would understand, Grandpa Thomas. "Grandpa, can I come over tomorrow after school? I really need to talk to you." "Of course, sweetheart," Thomas replied, his voice warm and reassuring. "And don't worry, things are going to change soon, I promise." As Sophia hung up, she didn't realize just how right her grandfather was. The old Williams farmhouse stood peaceful in the afternoon sun as Sophia walked up the gravel driveway. School had felt impossibly long today, each minute crawling by until she could finally escape to her grandfather's house. She knocked on the wooden door, clutching her sketchbook tightly against her chest. Grandpa Thomas opened the door with a smile that immediately made Sophia feel better. "There's my girl," he said warmly, stepping aside to let her in. "I made your favorite cookies." The familiar smell of chocolate chip cookies filled the house, bringing back memories of happier times when she was little, before her father had started treating her art like a problem to fix. "Thanks, Grandpa," Sophia said, following him into the kitchen where a plate of cookies sat next to 2 glasses of milk. "Now," Thomas said, sitting down across from her, "tell me what happened after Sunday dinner." Sophia took a deep breath and explained everything: the summer program representative coming on Friday, her mother's hesitation, and her father's firm refusal to support her dreams. Thomas listened carefully, his kind eyes never leaving her face. When she finished, he reached across the table and took her hand. "Do you know why I was a good judge all those years?" he asked. Sophia shook her head. "Because I learned how to see the whole picture, not just what was in front of me, but what was behind it too." He adjusted his glasses. "Your father wasn't always like this." "What do you mean?" Sophia asked, surprised. Thomas stood up slowly and walked to an old bookshelf in the corner. "Wait here," he said, pulling out a small wooden box from behind some books. When he returned to the table, he carefully opened the box. Inside was an old leather-bound book that looked like a journal, worn with age. "I found this last month when I was cleaning out some old boxes in the attic," he explained. "It belonged to your father." Sophia stared at the book, confused. "Dad kept a journal?" "Not exactly," Thomas said, opening it carefully. "Take a look." Sophia gasped. The pages weren't filled with words. They were filled with drawings. Beautiful, detailed sketches of landscapes, buildings, and people's faces. Each one was signed at the bottom, Richard Andrews, age 17. "I don't understand," Sophia whispered, turning the pages slowly. "Dad draws? Dad used to do art." Thomas nodded. "Your father was very talented. Maybe even more talented than you are now, and that's saying something. But why does he hate my art so much then? It doesn't make sense." Thomas sighed, sitting back in his chair. "That's what I've been trying to figure out. After I found this, I called some old friends who knew your father's parents, your other grandparents who passed away before you were born." He took off his glasses and cleaned them thoughtfully before continuing. "Your grandfather Andrews was a hard man. He ran his own business and wanted Richard to take it over. According to what I learned, when Richard wanted to apply to art school, his father completely refused. There was a huge fight. After that, Richard never drew again, at least not that anyone saw." Sophia felt a strange mix of sadness and anger. "So instead of supporting me, he's doing the same thing to me that his father did to him. How is that fair?" "It's not fair," Thomas agreed. "The people who are hurt sometimes pass that hurt along without even realizing it. Your father might not even see the connection." "What should I do, Grandpa? The representative is coming on Friday, and Dad won't let me go." Thomas tapped his fingers on the table, thinking. Finally, he said, "Go to the meeting on Friday. I'll call your school and tell them I'm picking you up for a doctor's appointment. Your mother doesn't need to know." "Really?" Sophia's eyes widened. "But what about after, if I get accepted?" "Let me worry about that," Thomas said firmly. "I've been quiet for too long watching how Richard treats you. It's time someone stood up for you, Sophia." As she left the farmhouse that evening, the old journal tucked safely in her backpack, Sophia felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. Friday morning arrived with a mixture of excitement and fear for Sophia. She dressed carefully, choosing her nicest blue sweater and dark jeans. Her portfolio, containing her 12 best pieces, was packed neatly in a special art case Grandpa Thomas had given her yesterday. "Going somewhere special?" her mother asked at breakfast, noticing Sophia's outfit. "Just school," Sophia replied, avoiding her eyes. She hated lying to her mother, but this was too important. Richard didn't even look up from his newspaper. "Make sure you focus on your math test today. No daydreaming about art." Sophia nodded silently and hurried out the door. The weight of her secret made her stomach churn, but she kept walking. For once, she was going to do something for herself. At school, Lily was waiting by the front entrance, practically bouncing with excitement. "Today's the big day," she squealed, hugging Sophia. "Did you bring everything?" Sophia patted her portfolio. "Everything's ready. Grandpa's picking me up at 1:30 for my doctor's appointment." Lily raised her eyebrows. "Your grandpa is seriously cool." Morning classes passed in a blur. Sophia couldn't focus on anything her teachers said. By lunchtime, her nerves were so bad she couldn't eat. "You need to calm down," Lily said, pushing an apple toward her. "You're the best artist in school. The representative is going to love your work." Miss Jenkins found Sophia in the cafeteria. "The representative from State University is setting up in the art room," she said with a smile. "She'll see students individually starting at 2 o'clock. You're scheduled for 2:15. At 1:25, Sophia waited by the school entrance, watching for her grandfather's car. Right on time, the familiar blue sedan pulled up. "Ready for this?" Thomas asked as she climbed in. Sophia clutched her portfolio. "I think so." They drove to the school's side entrance where Ms. Jenkins was waiting to let them in quietly. "Mr. Williams," she greeted Thomas warmly. "Thank you for supporting Sophia's talent." "Someone has to," Thomas replied, giving Sophia's shoulder a gentle squeeze. Ms. Jenkins led them to a small waiting area outside the art room. Through the window, Sophia could see a woman with short gray hair examining another student's work. "That's Professor Garcia," Ms. Jenkins explained. She runs the summer program. She's tough but fair. At 2:15 exactly, Ms. Jenkins opened the door. Professor Garcia, this is Sophia Andrews. The woman looked up and smiled. Come in, Sophia. Show me what you got. For the next 15 minutes, Sophia forgot all about her father's disapproval as she presented her work. Professor Garcia asked thoughtful questions about her techniques and inspirations, nodding occasionally as Sophia explained. Your use of light is quite remarkable for someone your age, Professor Garcia said, studying a painting of the old lighthouse. And this portrait of your grandfather shows real emotional depth. Finally, Professor Garcia closed the portfolio and looked at Sophia directly. I'll be honest with you, we only have 20 spots in the program, and we've had over 300 applicants. Sophia's heart sank. But, Professor Garcia continued, I'd like to offer you one of those spots. Your work shows exceptional promise. Sophia couldn't believe her ears. Really? I got in. You did. The program includes a partial scholarship, but there's still a fee of $800 for the 6-week session. Before Sophia could respond, Grandpa Thomas stepped forward from where he'd been waiting by the door. She accepts, he said firmly. I'll be covering her expenses. As they left the school, Sophia was so happy she could barely speak. The drive back to Thomas's house was filled with excited chatter about the program. It starts June 15th, right after school ends, Sophia explained. We'll have classes with real artists and field trips to museums and... She suddenly stopped, reality crashing back. Dad's never going to let me go. Thomas's expression grew serious as he pulled into his driveway. Leave your father to me. It's time he faced some truths he's been running from for far too long. Inside the house, Thomas picked up his phone. I'm calling your parents to come over for dinner tonight. All of them, your mother, father, and brother. Tonight? Sophia asked nervously. No time like the present, Thomas replied, already dialing. Some things have been hidden for too long. The old grandfather clock in Thomas's living room ticked loudly as Sophia helped set the dining table. Her hands trembled slightly as she placed the forks and knives in their proper positions. In just 30 minutes, her family would arrive, and everything would change. You're awfully quiet, Thomas observed, bringing a pot of his famous beef stew to the table. I'm scared, Sophia admitted. Dad's going to be so angry when he finds out about today. Thomas placed the pot on a trivet and looked at his granddaughter with kind eyes. Sometimes we need to face difficult things to make them better. Your father needs to face his past. The doorbell rang, making Sophia jump. She smoothed her sweater nervously as Thomas went to answer the door. Caroline entered first, giving her father a warm hug. Something smells wonderful, Dad. Michael followed, immediately asking about the Wi-Fi password so he could play games on his phone. Richard came in last, his face showing he would rather be anywhere else. This is unexpected, Richard said stiffly. Your call sounded urgent. It is, Thomas replied. But first, let's eat. Dinner began with uncomfortable small talk. Caroline asked about Thomas's garden. Michael barely looked up from his phone. Richard kept checking his watch. Sophie couldn't eat, pushing stew around her bowl while avoiding her father's eyes. So, Richard finally said, putting down his spoon, what's this important matter you called us all here for? Thomas dabbed his mouth with a napkin. It's about Sophia's future. Richard's expression hardened. If this is about that art program again. Sophia met with a representative today. Thomas interrupted. She was accepted into the summer program with a partial scholarship. The table fell silent. Caroline looked surprised, then proud. Michael actually looked up from his phone. Richard's face turned red. You what? He turned to Sophia. You went behind my back after I expressly told you no? I drove her there myself, Thomas said, his voice calm but firm. Because I believe in her talent. The same way I believed in yours, Richard. Richard's eyes widened. What are you talking about? Thomas stood up and walked to a side table where he had placed the old leather-bound sketchbook and a folder of papers. He returned and placed them on the table. This belongs to you, he said, sliding the sketchbook toward Richard. I found it in some of your mother's old things. Richard stared at the book like it might bite him. Where did you get this? Open it, Thomas said gently. The room was completely silent as Richard slowly opened the book, His hands trembled slightly as he turned the pages, revealing sketch after beautiful sketch. Caroline gasped, looking over his shoulder. "Richard, these are amazing," she whispered. "I had no idea you could draw like this." Sophia stared at her father's face, watching as different emotions crossed it: shock, pain, and something that looked like grief. "That was a long time ago," Richard finally said, his voice rough. He tried to close the book, but Thomas placed his hand on it. "You were 17, Sophia's age. You had been accepted to the Rhode Island School of Design. Full scholarship." Thomas opened the folder and pulled out an old acceptance letter. "Your father tore up the original, but the school sent this copy to your mother. She saved it." Richard's face went pale. "How do you know all this?" "Your mother told Caroline before she died, and Caroline told me years ago. I didn't realize how important it was until I found your sketchbook last month and saw what was happening with Sophia." Caroline turned to her husband with tears in her eyes. "Is this true? You were going to art school?" Richard stood up suddenly, pushing his chair back. "It doesn't matter. It was a childish dream, and my father was right to stop it, just like I'm right about Sophia." "No," Thomas's voice rang out, stronger than anyone had heard in years. "Your father was wrong, Richard, and you're making the same mistake with your daughter." Richard's face turned an angry shade of red as he stared at Thomas. The dining room felt smaller suddenly, filled with the tension of decades of buried feelings. "You have no right," Richard hissed. "No right to bring this up, to go behind my back with my daughter." "Dad, please." Sophia started, but Richard cut her off with a sharp gesture. "This conversation doesn't involve you, Sophia." "Doesn't involve her." Thomas's voice remained calm but firm. "This entire situation is about Sophia, about how you're crushing her dreams the same way your father crushed yours." Caroline placed a gentle hand on her husband's arm. "Richard, maybe we should listen." "There's nothing to listen to." Richard pulled away from her touch. "Art is a hobby, not a career. I learned that lesson a long time ago." Thomas sighed deeply and pulled another folder from beneath the sketchbook. "I wasn't going to show you this, but I think you need to see it." He opened the folder and carefully removed several yellowed newspaper clippings. He spread them on the table where everyone could see them. "What are these?" Michael asked, suddenly interested in the family drama. "Local newspaper articles from 1989, Thomas explained. "The regional high school art competition. First place winner, Richard Andrews." Sophia leaned forward, reading the headline. "Local teens art captures state prize, earns college scholarship." Below it was a photo of a young man who looked remarkably like her brother Michael, holding a painting of a stormy seascape. "You won a state competition?" Caroline asked, her voice filled with surprise. Richard didn't answer. He stared at the clippings, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "There's more," Thomas said quietly. He pulled out an old photograph of a tall, stern-looking man standing next to a teenage Richard. "This is your father, George Andrews, at your high school graduation. The same date he tore up your acceptance letter to art school." Richard's breathing grew heavier. "Stop this, right now." But Thomas wasn't finished. He pulled out one final piece of paper, a handwritten letter on faded blue stationery. "This is from your mother to mine, about a month after you started business school." Thomas adjusted his glasses and read. "George got his way, as always. Richard hasn't picked up a pencil since that awful fight. Sometimes I hear him crying at night, but he refuses to talk about it. George says he'll thank him someday, but I worry the light has gone out of my boy's eyes." The room fell completely silent. Sophia looked at her father and saw something she had never seen before, tears forming in his eyes. Richard Andrews, who never showed weakness, who never showed emotion beyond anger or disappointment, was fighting back tears. "Dad," she whispered. Richard turned away, but not before they all saw a tear slip down his cheek. He walked to the living room window and stood with his back to them, shoulders rigid. "Your father was wrong, Richard," Thomas said gently, following him. "I didn't say anything back then because it wasn't my place, but I'm speaking up now because I can't watch you do the same thing to Sophia." "You don't understand." Richard's voice was barely audible. "My father was trying to protect me from disappointment, from failure." "Did he protect you? Or did he just make you into a copy of himself?" Thomas asked. "Are you happier for having given up your art?" Richard didn't answer, but his silence spoke volumes. Caroline stood and walked to her husband's side. All these years, she said softly, I never knew. Why didn't you tell me? Because it didn't matter anymore, Richard replied, finally turning around. His eyes were red. It was childish, impractical. Was it? Thomas gestured to the sketchbook. Those drawings show real talent. The kind of talent Sophia has inherited. Richard's eyes moved to his daughter, who sat watching him with a mixture of fear and hope on her face. Dad, Sophia said quietly, I had no idea you could draw like that. The grandfather clock ticked loudly in the silence that filled the room. Richard stood frozen, looking at his daughter as if seeing her clearly for the first time. His face showed a battle of emotions, pride, regret, and something deeper that Sophia couldn't quite name. I haven't drawn in almost 30 years, Richard finally said, his voice quiet and strained. Caroline moved closer to him, placing her hand gently on his arm. Why, Richard? If you loved it so much. Richard sank heavily into an armchair, suddenly looking much older than his 48 years. My father had very clear ideas about success. Art wasn't part of that picture. He gave a bitter laugh. Picture? That's ironic. Tell them what happened, Thomas encouraged, his voice gentle. It's time they knew. Richard stared at his hands for a long moment before speaking. I was 17. The art competition win came with a scholarship to RISD, Rhode Island School of Design. One of the best art schools in the country. He swallowed hard. I was so excited. I'd been secretly applying to art schools behind my father's back. My mother knew, but she was afraid of your father. Thomas finished when Richard trailed off. Richard nodded. The acceptance letter came while my father was at work. I was planning to tell him that night, to show him that I could make something of myself through art. His voice grew harder. I had this whole speech prepared about how the scholarship proved I had talent, that I could succeed. Sophia leaned forward, completely absorbed in her father's story. This was a side of him she'd never seen before. What happened when you told him? Michael asked, his phone forgotten on the table. Richard's jaw tightened. He laughed, then he got angry. Said no son of his was going to waste his life doodling pictures. He tore up the acceptance letter right in front of me. Richard's voice cracked slightly. Then he took all my art supplies, everything I'd saved up for, and threw them in the trash. Oh, Richard, Caroline whispered, tears in her eyes. The next day, he drove me to the State University to register for business classes, Richard continued. He said, this is what real men do. They provide for their families. They don't chase fantasies. And you believed him, Sophia said softly. Richard looked up, meeting his daughter's eyes. I did, for a long time, but sometimes, he gestured to the sketchbook on the table. Sometimes I would see something, a sunset, an interesting face, and my fingers would itch to draw it. But I'd hear his voice in my head, telling me how foolish it was. Is that why you get so angry about my art? Sophia asked, her voice small but steady, because it reminds you of what you gave up? The room went still. It was the question no one had dared to ask directly. Richard stared at his daughter for a long moment. Then, to everyone's surprise, he reached for the old sketchbook. His fingers trembled slightly as he opened it to a drawing of a young woman who looked remarkably like Sophia. This was your grandmother when she was about your age, he said softly. The only person who ever encouraged my art. Thomas cleared his throat. Your father thought he was protecting you, Richard. Just like you think you're protecting Sophia. But there's a difference between preparing children for the real world and crushing their spirits. I never wanted to crush her spirit, Richard protested, but his voice lacked conviction. But you have been, Caroline said gently. Can't you see that? Richard closed the sketchbook and looked at his daughter across the table. For once, his usual mask of stern disapproval was gone, replaced by uncertainty. The program starts in June, Sophia said, breaking the silence. Professor Garcia said I have real potential. Richard took a deep breath. The room seemed to hold its breath with him, waiting for his response. Your grandfather was right about one thing, he finally said, his voice rough with emotion. No child should have their dreams taken away by their parent. Sophia's eyes widened with hope. Dad? Does that mean? I need some time to think, Richard said, standing up abruptly. I need some air. Before anyone could respond, he walked quickly to the front door and stepped outside into the cool evening air. The next morning dawned bright and clear, sunlight streaming through Sophia's bedroom window. She had barely slept, her mind replaying the events at Grandpa Thomas's house over and over. After her father had walked out, the family had sat in awkward silence until Caroline suggested they all go home. The drive back had been quiet, with Richard staring straight ahead at the roads, saying nothing. Sophia checked her phone again. No messages. She sighed and got out of bed, wondering what would happen next. Would her father forbid the summer program again, or had something changed? Downstairs, she found her mother making pancakes, Michael already at the table scrolling through his phone. There was no sign of her father. "Where's Dad?" Sophia asked, trying to sound casual. Caroline gave her a small smile. "He left early this morning. He said he had something important to do." Sophia's heart sank. He was probably at work, trying to forget everything that had happened yesterday. "Eat your breakfast," Caroline said, placing a plate of pancakes in front of her. "Whatever happens, we'll figure it out together." Just as Sophia was finishing her breakfast, they heard the front door open. Richard walked in carrying a large shopping bag. His eyes looked tired, like he hadn't slept either. There was something different about his face, a softness that hadn't been there before. "Good morning," he said, his voice unusually quiet. "Richard," Caroline started, "about yesterday." He held up his hand. "Not yet. I need to speak with Sophia first." He turned to his daughter. "Can we talk? In the living room?" Sophia nodded nervously and followed her father. He sat on the couch and placed the shopping bag on the coffee table between them. "I spent most of last night thinking," Richard began, his hands clasped tightly together. "About my father, about you, about the choices I made." He took a deep breath. "I've been unfair to you, Sophia." Sophia stared at him, not quite believing what she was hearing. "When I saw your art, it reminded me of everything I gave up, everything I lost." His voice grew rough with emotion. "And instead of being proud of you, I was jealous, afraid for you, angry at myself." "Dad, please, let me finish." Richard reached for the shopping bag. "This morning, I went to the art supply store when it opened." He pulled out several packages, professional-grade sketchbooks, a set of expensive drawing pencils, and watercolor paints. The clerk helped me pick out the best supplies. Sophia's eyes widened as she looked at the art supplies. "I don't know anything about art anymore," Richard continued. "But I want to learn. I want to understand your world." He pulled out one more item from the bag, a crisp white envelope. "This is the registration form for the summer program. I've already signed it." Tears filled Sophia's eyes. "Really? You're letting me go?" Richard's own eyes grew moist. "Not just letting you. I'm driving you there myself on the first day. Your grandfather offered to pay, but this is my responsibility. I want to support you, not hold you back." Caroline appeared in the doorway, Michael behind her, both watching with surprise. "There's one more thing," Richard said, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a folded piece of paper and handed it to Sophia. She carefully unfolded it to find a sketch, slightly rough and unpracticed, but clearly drawn with care. It was a drawing of Sophia sitting at her easel, focused on her work. At the bottom was his signature, "Dad, 2025. "You drew this?" Sophia whispered, touching the paper gently. Richard nodded. "Last night. It's not very good. I'm out of practice. But I want to try again." He took her hand. "And I want you to teach me." Caroline came to sit beside them, tears streaming down her face. Even Michael put his phone down, watching his father with new respect. "I can't change the past," Richard said, looking around at his family. "I can't get back those years I lost, but I can make sure history doesn't repeat itself." He squeezed Sophia's hand. "Your grandfather was brave enough to stand up for you. Now it's my turn to be brave enough to stand with you." Sophia threw her arms around her father, feeling for the first time that he truly saw her. Outside the window, a car pulled into the driveway, Grandpa Thomas, coming to check on them. As Richard went to greet him, Sophia picked up one of the new pencils, opened a fresh sketchbook, and began to draw a portrait of her father with a smile on his face.